And his people are crying out. They're saying, Lord, save us. Save us from this oppressor. And just as God usually does, he answers, he shows up, and he raises up a leader to lead them out of bondage to the promised land. So who does he call up? He calls up Moses. Moses leads the people out of Egypt to the promised land. And we see in the book of Exodus, God shows up and God does some amazing miracles. And perhaps one of the ones that's the most noticeable is when they're faced with an obstacle of the Red Sea, the Red Sea, God parts the waters, and the people of Israel, millions of them, walk on dry ground. And the people of Israel, that generation, see the power of God firsthand, and they're praising. They're glorifying him. Well, a couple months into their journey, they get a little impatient. Anyone ever get impatient? All right. If you haven't driven on the 14, try it out. They started getting impatient. They started getting bitter. They said, God, you said you're going to lead us to the promised land, and here we are in the middle of nowhere, the desert. Here's the sad thing about what happens. Because of their unbelief, the people who had been promised to enter into the promised land never had the opportunity to see the land flowing with milk and honey. So that generation who saw God work, who was going to see God work, their generation passed away in the wilderness. Well, by now, there's a whole new generation that's come up. Some young ones, some teenagers, some young adults. And historians believe that now in this history of Israel, there are millions of Israelites that are still wandering in the desert. Some of these children were born in wilderness. That's all they knew. Well, God's promise still stands. Aren't you grateful that God's promises never change? Amen? I think we did a little better than that. Aren't you grateful that God's promises never change? And God's promises for his people never changed. So Moses passes off the scene. A whole generation of Israelites have passed off the scene. So God raises a new leader, and he calls Joshua to take Moses' mantle. And Joshua now leads the people of Israel to the promised land. So when we get to Joshua chapter 3, we find that, man, they're on the brink. Man, they're right on the border. They're right on the cusp.